On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's going on, Colts fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your host, Cody Felger. Joining me, Andrew Thomason. Andrew, how are you doing here, man, on this beautiful day?
I'm doing well, Cody, and it's certainly beautiful, so you can't really complain there. How are things going with you?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, we were just talking off air. It's just been one of those weeks where it feels like all you do is get up, go to work, and come back and go to sleep. So apologies on the lack of content. We got up a couple videos this week, and shout out to you guys for being able to do that. But it's just been a crazy week. But wanted to kind of close out this week now, kind of looking over. We've talked about the NFL draft. You talked about the Colts draft. It all happened this last weekend. And so I thought for this episode, Andrew, we could do something kind of similar, but a little bit different in a way where, we have – when we did some of the picks initially, we kind of gave a letter grade on a few of them. But I wanted to kind of follow up with an episode here. And we're going to kind of change it up a little bit. At the end, we're going to give our overall letter grade for the Indianapolis Colts 2020 NFL Draft. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. So instead of giving an initial letter grade for each pick, we're going to give a number. And this is how the numbers are going to work. So starting with 10, that's the highest you can go. And so if you figure all nine picks the Colts made, there will be 90 available points. And we'll go 10 is an A+, 9 is an A, 8 is an A-, 7 is a B, and we'll go down the line. And then at the end for 1, it'll be a D+ and a D. And then 0 points will be rewarded if we say, hey, we didn't like this pick. We give it a D- or an F. And so at the end of this, we'll add all the points up and kind of give our overall thoughts on all 9 picks that the Colts made. And we can jump right in here to the first pick the Colts made. Obviously, they didn't have a first-round pick, and we're not going to include that DeForest Buckner pick because technically it's not a draft pick. Even though you could count it, I would probably give it a 10. But we're not going to count it for the sake of this argument. But we'll start here in the second round. The Colts had the second overall pick in the second round, pick 34 overall. And they select wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. Out of USC, a big body wide receiver, 6'4", over 220. I guess before I give my grade, Andrew, what are your thoughts here on Michael Pittman, and what grade would you give this selection for the Colts?
I think it's a fantastic selection. You look at the amount of needs that the Colts had going into this offseason, having a big-bodied wide receiver that can go up and catch those 50-50 contested balls is certainly or was certainly a major need for the Colts. And so me personally, I'm going to give it a 9. I think Michael Pittman is going to come in and contribute right away, and he's going to be a perfect complement to T.Y. Hilton in this offense.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious why not a 10? What's holding you back, I guess, from giving this a complete A+? I mean, A still a good grade. I'm curious.
Yeah, I guess I could give it a 10, but the first, number that popped into my head was just a 9. I like the pick a lot, enough to give it that A-, but I want to see what he's like on the field first. Sure. I want to see how he's able to contribute, how explosive he is in this offense before I'm comfortable enough with giving it that full 10.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, that's fair. I'm trying to think here. I was going to give it a 10, but you're right. I mean, we've seen players who look super great in college. I mean, as Colts fans, we've seen a lot of first-round busts in the last decade. And so, I'll probably give it a 9 as well, just because I think that he obviously fills that need, the biggest need undoubtedly on offense. I would argue the biggest need overall on the Colts for 2020. And that's something that Chris Ballard just does really well. And the reason I give it a 9 is because I think he's reliable, but I think he's a safe pick here. I just want to see, can he take it to the next level now? I mean, he was really, really good at USC, obviously. Over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns last year, was fantastic. But, yeah, you're right. I just want to see how he fits, because sometimes rookie receivers can struggle in the NFL in their first year. Paris Campbell, he wasn't really healthy, but there were still things he had to work on. I do feel like Michael Pittman is a more refined product than Paris Campbell at this point. But, yeah, I'm going to go with a 9 here. So 9 out of 10, that's an A. That's a good pick there for the Colts there. Okay, now moving on to their next second-round pick here. Let's go on now to running back Jonathan Taylor. This is pick number 41 in the second round. He's a running back out of Wisconsin, arguably the best running back in this class, one of the top running backs in this class, undoubtedly. Had over 2,000 yards back-to-back seasons, had over 20 touchdowns this last season. He's going to be a good complement to Marlon Mack, I feel like. And but there are some issues and there are some things that there are some knocks on him. But Andrew, what would you give this letter, I guess this number for Jonathan Taylor here?
I'm actually going to give this one a 10. I think this is a tremendous move. I mean, obviously going into the draft, I don't think many Colts fans really expected the Colts to maybe look into running back, especially that early. But when you look at a guy like Jonathan Taylor, and as you mentioned, Cody, his just overwhelming production while at Wisconsin, it's something you can't really ignore. And Marlon Mack is going to do a contract year, and if I'm being completely objective here, he hasn't really been all that healthy throughout his first 4 seasons. Now, he's played really well and has produced several 1,000-yard seasons, or at least close to it, when he has been healthy, but he has been injured from time to time, and I think that is part of the reason why the Colts went up this early to get Jonathan Taylor to maybe replace Mack going into the 2021 season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate here. I'm going to give it an 8. I love Jonathan Taylor. I think the Colts got a steal here. I love the value pick here. But I look at the running backs, man. It seems like we've seen over the past however many years with the NFL, it seems like running backs a lot of times only have a few good years, and it seems like they're pretty expendable and pretty replaceable. And especially since the Colts traded up here, and with the needs we know they had, maybe at corner, maybe at defensive end, I kind of felt like, I like this pick a lot. I really do. Don't get me wrong. And I think he's going to do really well with the Colts, obviously. But I feel like for this pick, I would have probably liked to see a position that's more of a premium position, if you will, say corner, defensive end, to just help that. I know the Colts invested a lot in this offseason into those two positions. And they obviously invested last year in the last 2 years, really, into second-round picks at that defensive line. But I guess for me, it's just something where we've seen how the league treats running backs, and unfortunately it hasn't been very well. And so to trade up for this guy, I don't know. I like him as a player. I don't like the running back position, if you will, in terms of the pick here. But, if he goes on to be the best running back in the league for the next few years, it may well be worth it. So that's just my take there on that. But I really, really do like this pick. Okay, now moving on to round 3, pick 85. We have the Colts selecting a safety out of Utah, Justin Blackmon. Not Justin Blackmon. I keep going onto this site. It's Julian Blackmon out of Utah. Andrew, what are your thoughts here on Blackmon now with the Colts? They add to their secondary, add to the safety position. What are your thoughts here on Julian Blackmon?
I think first and foremost, when you look at secondary help, you certainly can't frown or turn away from something like that. Chris Ballard and Matt Eberflus in this defensive scheme certainly, you could argue, is predicated on having enough quality depth at safety and corner positions. And so I think Blackmon is a player that could certainly come in, although he's coming off of a torn ACL, maybe later in the season or even next season could come in and play multiple positions for you. That safety position, he could play maybe in the slot. He can maybe play in the nickel for you, even though that's kind of where Kenny Moore plays at the moment. he can play in a lot of positions for you. I think this is a great pick in terms of, as I just mentioned, his versatility. I think that's why the Colts drafted him maybe a little earlier than people had expected. So I think Blackmon could come in, and if the Colts maybe don't pick up Malik Hooker's fifth-year option, maybe Blackmon comes in at some point next year or two and proves himself to be a suitable replacement or successor, if you will, to Malik Hooker.
Mm-hmm. Did you already give the letter that, or the number you had for this pick? I'm sorry, I may have missed it.
Oh, no, you're right. I did. My bad on that. I'd give it an 8. I would. I'd give it an 8.
Okay. And why would you give it an 8 now? I'm curious.
I think like I said, I think this is maybe a bit of a surprising pick. Maybe, I don't think the people that, are more in depth on the NFL draft and study later round picks, I don't think they maybe expected Blackmon to go as high as he did. But I think Chris Ballard, as I said, and Matt Eberflus and this Colts defensive unit think highly of him. I think, like I said, he can play several positions for you. And mainly, the ACL does concern me a bit, just because, Malik Hooker, to give somewhat of a personal example, he was coming off of a torn ACL in 2017 and then didn't have a great year in 2018 and really hasn't been all that productive since that injury, one could argue at least. And so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of giving it an 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if he is back to full strength, it's something where Frank Reich and Chris Ballard not acknowledged he's probably not going to be ready until maybe October. So that's a good few games that they won't have Julian Blackmon. I'm probably going to go an 8 as well, just simply because you mentioned the injury. That's kind of a little bit scary, but when this guy's healthy, I feel like the Colts got a good value pick here. I saw people projecting him before he was injured into the second round, and the Colts get him here in the third round. So I like this pick quite a lot, but the injury is the only thing that's really keeping me from giving this a 9 or a 10. And that's just the biggest factor here. But I think he's a guy that now we know Malik Hooker and his injury history. He hasn't, similar to Marlon Mack, has not played a full 16-game season since he was drafted in 2017. And so it's good to just have some insurance. But I guess my quote is, do you but, now I don't know. For me, it's kind of like, are you okay now with having two guys who have had recent ACL injuries? Now, I know Malik Hooker hasn't had that for a couple of years, but both guys now have had ACL injuries. Now, again, we've seen different players, though, who have got those ACL injuries and come back and been super, super good in the NFL level. I think of Frank Gore, for example. I think he tore his ACL when he was at Miami, came in, and he was one of the most durable running backs for a decade. And so you just don't know with these guys. And I think, honestly, it's probably better for Julian Blackmon to have this injury now. If you're choosing a time, you obviously don't want him to get injured at all. But if you're choosing a time, I think choose it when you're younger, because you can recover faster from it and your body can just bounce back, as opposed to when you're older and you're struggling with injuries and they take a lot longer to recover from. I would say, obviously, it's not ideal, but at any point, if you suffer an injury like this, you'd probably want it to be when you're younger, so you can recover from it quicker. So yeah, that's our thoughts there on that one. I think we pretty much are thinking the same thing there, Andrew. Now moving on to round 4, pick 122, the Indianapolis Colts potentially. Now I say potentially because Chris Ballard said let's not crown this guy the Messiah right away, but they take quarterback Jacob Eason out of Washington. And he's a guy that I know a lot of people and a lot of mock drafts had him going maybe to the Colts, but like in the second or third round. And he drops all the way to the 4th round, pick 122, and the Colts select Jacob Eason. What are your thoughts here, Andrew, on this new quarterback for the Colts?
Yeah, I'm sort of with Chris Ballard. As far as a grade is concerned, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7, just because we don't really know what we have in Eason, or what the Colts have, I should say, in Eason. And I do want to pump the brakes a little bit, similar to Chris Ballard, in sort of crowning Jacob Eason as the next Colts franchise quarterback moving forward. That being said, he certainly has the intangibles. He's 6'5", 220 plus pounds. He's got a heck of an arm, which, as many people know, if there's one thing you can't teach in the NFL, it's how far you can throw a football. But in terms of his overall development, and Frank Reich has said this as well, they don't think he's there yet. I mean, he throws a really nice deep ball. I've watched a lot of his highlights as of late. But in terms of his short and intermediate routes, a lot of the balls are, from what I've seen, were thrown a bit behind the intended targets. And so he certainly has a lot to learn. But on the flip side of that, as many people have said, I don't think he could have landed in a better place, Cody. I mean, you're sitting behind Phillip Rivers and Jacoby Brissett, arguably two of the NFL's greatest leaders and competitors in the game, particularly at the quarterback position. Phillip Rivers certainly is arguably a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, this guy, Jacob Eason has a chance to really learn some quality things in terms of what it's like to be an NFL quarterback, and can he step up to the plate, and he's got big shoes to fill now. Let's remember, Peyton Manning and then Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers he can play too. So when you're stepping in for those three guys, those are some big shoes to fill, and I think Eason's got a ways to go, but I like the pick. So like I said, I give it a 7.
Okay, yeah, I'm probably gonna go a little bit higher. I'm going to give it actually a 9. And here's the reason why I'm going to give it a 9. I know some people are probably in the comments shaking their fists at me, whatever, bring it on. But anyway, the reason why I would give it a 9 is just because I think this is tremendous value for a guy that people thought was arguably a fringe second round talent and potentially a first round talent. I know some people even had that. Some crazy mock drafts kind of had that, but yeah, I mean, for me, I think I'm going to give it a 9 because you got him for a 4th round pick. And it's like, for me, it's like the 4th round is kind of like, it could be either Marlon Mack or it could be Zach Banner. You just don't know. And so for me, I like that because it's like Jacob Eason's kind of like a boomer bust prospect for me. He's a guy that has tremendous physical attributes, tremendous. Like I've seen highlights and plays of him where he makes throws that Jacoby Brissett would never even imagine making. But, also, you look at on the flip side, you look at that and you're like, well, he could be reckless with the ball. And there's just there's some concerns there. And I know there are some concerns potentially about his drive and, maybe what his passion for the game. And I know that was something that, like, when he was asked, he told people, yeah, that's one thing I want to prove is that I'm passionate about this game. And that could be a little bit scary for some fans who are like, already, there's some concerns. Especially, talking about Andrew Luck, we know Andrew Luck loves football, but we know that Andrew Luck, along with Anthony Costanzo, if you were going to say any Colt left football early, we'd probably say them just because they're not, quote unquote, football guys fully. They have other interests and they're just kind of unique people, and they are. And we love them. They've been tremendous for the Colts, but, Jacob Eason, I think that would just make me kind of say, oh, let me do my homework on this guy. And, I said, the Colts got him at a good value, but you have to think also, there's probably a reason why he fell to the 4th round, right? When teams started to do their research, there's probably a reason why he fell this far. But it's kind of a unique situation that Jacob Eason finds himself in. He's not going to be thrust in to the starting role, even if Phillip Rivers was to get dinged up for a game or something. Jacoby Brissett would be your backup, right? Jacob Eason's going to be competing with Chad Kelly for that 3rd string quarterback position. And so it's something where he is not going to probably more than likely be thrown into the fire unless something crazy happens here in year 1. He's going to have a chance to just learn from some of the best pros out there. I mean, Phillip Rivers is a guy, I feel like him and Jacob Eason's game are kind of similar. They're guys that trust their arms, and they're guys that are kind of gunslingers, and on the flip side, Jacoby Brissett's a guy that is kind of a game manager. So it's an interesting situation that he finds himself in where he has a quarterback that kind of plays to his style. And then he has some, Jacoby Brissett, who probably the biggest knock on him was he didn't make enough downfield throws. I mean, the Colts just were not good in that department last year. So for me, I think it's interesting because he kind of has a tale of 2 different quarterbacks that he can learn from and he can pick their pockets. And I just think he definitely just needs to just soak it all in that he can while the Colts have. You mentioned Phillip Rivers, first ballot Hall of Famer. Jacoby Brissett, he's played some games, and just sit there and learn. Just be a sponge. That's what I think he has to do. But I give it a 9 because he's got all the physical tools to be a starting quarterback. He's got things that you can't teach. And I think, man, at worst, I think Jacob Eason is a backup quarterback for you. At best, he could be your franchise quarterback. And I'm perfectly fine with taking Jacob Eason here in the 4th round, because if he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out, whatever. It's just a 4th round pick. But if he does, you get a tremendous steal here. So that's why I would probably go with a 9 there for Jacob Eason. Okay, now moving on to the 5th round. The Colts traded with the Lions. Pick 149, and they get offensive lineman Danny Pinter out of Ball State, who, by the way, shameless plug, we interviewed Danny a few days ago on the podcast, so be sure to check that one out. But he's a guy that's he played tackle in college for Ball State, but he's probably going to slide inside. Chris Ballard kind of talked about he's probably going to, if you will, fill that kind of Josh Andrews type of role, playing the guard and the center position and kind of just working within the interior. Andrew, what are your thoughts here on the Colts selection here in the 5th round of Danny Pinter?
Yeah, this might surprise some people, Cody, but I'm going to give it an 8. And not necessarily in terms of the player. And let me be clear, that's not an indictment on Danny Pinter, but usually once you start getting to those later round picks, sort of as you mentioned with Jacob Eason, there's a reason they get picked in the later rounds. But that's beside the point. I still give it a solid 8, and I give it an 8 for this reason. The Colts desperately had to address the offensive line depth going into not only this offseason, but particularly the draft, because we didn't really see them do much in the free agency period when it came to addressing the offensive line depth. So Pinter here, as you mentioned, is a former tight end who converted to tackle and can come in, according to Chris Ballard, and play that guard center spots on the offensive line. I think he's going to come in and be a quality backup for you. And Ryan Kelly, unfortunately, has had some injuries the last couple of seasons, maybe not this past season, but couple of seasons before. So you lose a guy like Josh Andrews, and a guy like Danny Pinter could come in and fill the shoes of Kelly if needed, or one of the guards if they were to go down. So I think I give it an 8 because it was such an important need, and I think it's quality value. And I think that he could come in and be a quality backup for you.
Mm-hmm. I even think potentially he could maybe compete, maybe not this year, but in the coming years for that right guard spot. I really think he's a guy, he's got really good strength. I think he's somebody who said, I feel like I can improve on that in that area. I think he's got some decent strength. He can definitely improve there. He's a very good pass protector, which I think is very important. He's very athletic. You mentioned he was a converted tight end. So if he puts on some strength, I think he could potentially be a good right guard option there for you. I mean, we've seen the Colts have gotten some pretty decent players there in the later rounds. Think of Joe Haig, for example. They got him in the 5th round a few years ago. And I see Danny Pinter potentially being a little bit better than Joe Haig. Honestly, I feel like we saw what Joe Haig could do, right? He was a spot starter backup for you. But I feel like Danny Pinter has some other qualities that I feel like could potentially maybe make him a future starter down the road. So I'm going to give it an 8 as well. I just think it fills an immediate need that you need there. At the interior, you have Laraven Clark, which I think is notable. I mean, he's not the greatest player in the world, but I mean, he's seen some game action, so you have a little bit of backup experience there. But in the interior, you had really no guys outside of your 3 interior starters that saw really any game action last year. And so I think adding Pinter just adds a little bit of competition to that offensive interior, especially at the right guard position, and just gives you more depth. I think that's just what you need. You just need more depth. You consistently need, Chris Ballard has talked about he needs 8, 9, potentially 10 guys on that offensive and defensive line. And I think just adding Pinter fills a need, and I think he's a pretty good player for you, very athletic, which I think will help a lot for him. So that's our grade there on him. Now we can move on now to the 6th round, which the Colts actually had 4 picks in the 6th round. We can start here at 193. They take defensive tackle out of Penn State, Robert Windsor. What are your thoughts here, Andrew, on the Colts selecting Windsor?
Yeah, before I give my grade, I want to be clear. This is not an indictment or a shot by any means at Windsor. I think he could maybe come in and compete for that fourth string defensive tackle spot, but you might be able to guess where I'm going with this. I'm gonna give it a 5, and I'm gonna give it a 5 because personally, I would have much rather seen the Colts address defensive end. Not that they haven't, with obviously the last several drafts, investing, as you mentioned earlier, Cody, a lot of those second-round picks and some really, really quality defensive ends with tremendous upside. But the Colts did a lot of work during the free agency period and brought in DeForest Buckner and Sheldon Day, and you have guys like Taekwon Lewis and Danico Autry as well, who's played the 3 technique prior to Buckner being traded for. So you have plenty of depth and plenty of quality depth at that defensive tackle position. And this pick, like I said, I would have rather seen it be a defensive end. And so I'm not sure what Windsor can bring in terms of maybe other than a third or fourth string defensive tackle.
Yeah, I mean, you thought yours was low. I'm going to 3. I hated this pick. I hated this pick for a lot of reasons. First off, you mentioned that defensive tackle group is pretty good. I mean, you addressed it in free agency. You have Grover Stewart. You have, Danico Autry. Taekwon Lewis has played in 3 technique. DeForest Buckner, Sheldon Day. Your defensive interior is completely clogged at this point. I just don't understand. Especially, I wanted a tight end. I really did. I felt like there were some decent options there at tight end that I felt like, you signed Trey Burton, but he's had some injury history the last year. And I just would like the Colts to bring in a little more competition for a player that I think could potentially make the roster. And I just don't think, unless Robert Windsor is just somehow just incredible in training camp, I don't see him making this roster. And I would have preferred you taking another position that you feel like could potentially make the roster. Now, I know it's just a 6th-round pick, and some people argue you're not really investing that much into this, which I get that. But I also think there were some other picks with some other positions that still need potentially tweaked and addressed that you could have addressed there in the 6th round instead of taking a guy that most likely, unless the Colts cut somebody, is not going to make this roster. I mean, let's be real. There's just no space for him. It's no knock on Robert Windsor. It's just like I just didn't see where he'd fit in. I really don't. Now, we could be completely wrong on this, and, we've been plenty wrong before. If I'm wrong on this, I will happily be wrong on this, but I just did not like this pick. I really did not. I was scratching my head. I was like, why are you adding, especially the defensive interior? Now, who knows? Robert Windsor's already switched from nose tackle to the 3 technique at Penn State. Maybe the Colts feel like, maybe he can play some defensive end. I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe he loses a little bit more weight and plays more to the defensive end for you. But I don't know. I just don't see his fit here on this roster. So I'm just going to give it – you said you gave it a 5, Andrew. I'm going to give it a 3, I think. Now we're probably going to have somebody upset at us, and we'll gladly be wrong. We'll see. We'll see when training camp comes and preseason comes if Windsor can bring something. But our first impressions are we didn't really like this pick. All right, moving on now to the next 6th-round pick. The Colts actually had 3 picks in a row. Now, this was the pick, number 211. The Colts traded former second-round pick of 2017, Quincy Wilson, for this pick, and they drafted essentially his replacement, another corner, Isaiah Rodgers out of UMass. He's a little bit shorter. He's not Quincy Wilson's size by any means, but he's a little bit more versatile, and he plays special teams. What are your thoughts here, Andrew, on Isaiah Rodgers?
I'm going to give it an 8. I like the trade of Quincy Wilson, and that's no shot at Quincy, but we all know that he had his struggles here in Indianapolis, and I think it was best for he and the team to move forward. That being said, with his replacement, as you sort of stated, Cody, with Isaiah Rodgers out of UMass, I've watched a little bit of film on Isaiah, and I think he's could come in and compete for that. I think he has a legit shot to make this roster. I'll put it that way. I think you look at Xavier Rhodes and TJ Carey, the 2 free agents that the Colts brought in. Honestly, I like both of those signings, but I think they're sort of just banking on the fact that Rhodes is going to get back to his all-pro and Pro Bowl days when he was with Minnesota, and we don't know if that's going to be the case. And so I don't think you can ever have too much depth in the secondary. And I think Isaiah Rodgers, as you mentioned, Cody, is very versatile where the positions he can play. as well as being a special teams player. So I think he's going to contribute quite well there. And so I like the pick. I really do. I give it an 8.
Up there. I really like this pick too, because he brought in TJ Carey, who we think will probably be the backup slot guy for Kenny Moore. But, you bring in another guy like Isaiah Rodgers who can play some slot. He's also, I watched some of his tape. He's a pretty fiery guy out there. I mean, whatever he lacks in height, he makes up for in competitiveness. He's certainly a guy I like a lot, and he plays special teams. He's a pretty darn good returner too, which I don't know if you saw, Andrew, but the Colts, or I guess Chester Rogers kind of announced it. He's not going to be returning to the Colts. He kind of handled the punts last year for the Colts. And so, Nyheim Hines was fantastic in the games that he returned punts for the Colts last year, especially that Carolina game. He was absolutely insane. But looking at it now, you just add another guy. You basically drop a Rodgers and bring in another Rodgers to potentially fill his role. So I like him because he can play special teams, which Quincy Wilson did not. And he also could maybe contribute in the slot, which we saw last year when Kenny Moore went down. I mean, the Colts had nobody to even come close to sniffing the level that Kenny Moore plays the slot. So I like him for those reasons, especially here in the 6th round. I think he's a guy that can come in and make this roster because he can play special teams and he can also contribute a little bit on the field for you if you get in a pinch and you're needing that. So I like this Isaiah Rodgers pick a lot more, obviously, than the last pick, Robert Windsor. But moving on here, pick 212. Right after that, the Colts traded with the Patriots. They get another big body wide receiver here, Desmond Patmon out of Washington State. And just before I say this, it's kind of funny. I don't know if you've done this, Andrew, but I've kind of messed up their names sometimes. So the Colts, let's see, Michael Pittman, Danny Pinter, and now Desmond Patmon. They're all similar names. And so I'm kind of just if I mess up one of their names, I apologize, but I'm just man, the Colts got a lot of P and T for whatever reason from their draft class. But Desmond Patton's the pick here out of Washington State. What are your thoughts here on Patmon and potentially his fit here with the Colts roster?
Yeah, I'm going to give it an 8. I like the pick. The Colts, as we mentioned earlier, arguably their number one need was addressing that big body wide receiver. Obviously, they selected Michael Pittman earlier in the 2nd round, and then they come back in the 6th round and they get Desmond Patmon. And I am with you, Cody. Sometimes I struggle with last names as well. Those things, they can be tricky when they have similar names, as you mentioned. So Patmon, I haven't really done a ton of film study just yet on him, but from what I understand, I think the Colts really like him. I think they like his character. I think he's got a real shot to make this roster. I mean, you look at some of the guys that are maybe on the back end in terms of receiver depth, the Darius Fountains of the world, the Chad Williams of the world, and other receivers as well. I think I think he could come in and potentially maybe compete for that 4th or even 5th wide receiver spot. In my opinion, with a guy like Phillip Rivers, who really has a lot of success with throwing those 50-50 contested balls and games, I don't think you can ever have enough big-bodied wide receivers. And so I like the pick, and for that reason, I'm giving it an 8.
Yeah, I like this pick too. I'm going to kind of cheat here. I'm going to go 7.5 because I was 7 feels too low for him because he just has a lot of raw physical tools, but he's still not a refined receiver. I don't even know if he's going to make this roster. But he is a guy, man, that I really like a lot, especially here at the 6th round here. Just look, his hands, man, are absolutely huge. He's got over 10-inch hands. So he's got big hands. He's a big body wide receiver. He's 6'4". He actually weighs more than Michael Pittman. Just a big body receiver. Phillip Rivers loves those guys, especially getting him in the 6th round to compete with some of these guys. Reese Fountain. I know they just cut Steve Ishmael, but Ashton Doolin's another guy that they like quite a bit, who's played some special teams for him. So it'll be interesting to just get, I thought I like what the Colts did, honestly. I felt like that was the thing they've lacked for so long is just big body wide receivers that you can use in the red zone. And he's another guy that I don't know how much he's going to see the field, but, we saw last year with all those injuries to the Colts receivers, sometimes you need some of those guys to step up, and maybe Patmon will have the chance to do that this year. if something similar happens like it did last year with just the injuries on injuries with the wide receiver position, and it just adds more depth to that wide receiver position. So I like this pick a lot. I just think he's still pretty raw, but that's kind of what you bank on here in the 6th round. You get guys with good physical tools, or guys who are very versatile and guys that can contribute on special teams, and guys who just have that potential to put it all together. And so I like this pick a lot. I'll give it a 7.5 there. And then the last pick here, pick 213, also from the Patriots. The Colts select Jordan Glasgow out of Michigan. He was listed as a safety, but he also played some linebacker, a very good special teams player for Michigan. What are your thoughts here, Andrew, on Jordan Glasgow?
I think the Colts love him. I think Chris Ballard, if you haven't seen the last episode of With the Next Pick, I highly recommend you watching that, or to go and watch it. It's fantastic. The Colts obviously do a tremendous job, and I don't really want to give too much away, but Chris Ballard and Frank Reich and this Colts staff absolutely raved about Glasgow's character, about his capabilities to come in and play special teams for you and to do it at a quality level. I think he's got a legitimate shot to come in and be a key contributor on special teams. And, honestly, Cody, I know the Colts have, I should say, Zaire Franklin, Matthew Adams, and EJ Speed at that right outside linebacker position, but we haven't really seen too much in terms of production from them. And so, maybe Glasgow comes in and competes for that position, or maybe a second or third string in that role at that right outside linebacker. And so overall, I'll have to, that's interesting. Just because of how well he can contribute to special teams, I'm going to have to give it an 8. I mean, I really am. I like, I haven't really done a ton of study on Glasgow just yet, but I like the overall production. As I mentioned, I like, as I've said now a bunch of times, sorry, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I like how he can play on special teams and play well. And I think he's going to be a key asset for the Colts moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I like him in terms of he gives tremendous effort, which I think is huge. I don't know how great he'll be, if he's called on to, an injury happens, he's called on. I don't know how. He's not a great athlete. But you mentioned he can play special teams, and I think, a lot of people don't really think about special teams can win you and lose you games. I mean, we saw that so many times last year with Adam Vinatieri, unfortunately missing extra points, missing field goals. That stuff adds up. And I think it's honestly the reason, amongst other things, but one of the reasons why the Colts didn't make the playoffs and didn't have a winning record was the special teams just really suffered last year. And overall, the team suffered. And so I'm perfectly fine here with bringing in another guy. I'm going to give it an 8 as well here for Glasgow here, the last pick the Colts had. So now we've gone through all of our picks here. Andrew, you had a 71 out of 90, which translates to a 78%, which is a C+. I think overall, the big one was just the Robert Windsor pick. We both gave that one a low one, so that really, out of 9 picks, if one of them is that low, it really impacts the entire class. So 78% for you. I had 67.5 out of 90, which is a 75% for me. But I think if we take that out here, it would be around a B. I really do. I think it's a B to B plus type of draft outside of the Robert Windsor pick. And so that seems about right there for us. We'll probably give it a solid B. I felt like there were some positions that I felt like maybe you could have addressed somewhere else. But, overall, I thought it was a solid draft for the Colts. I really did. I thought they addressed some key positions that they needed to. And maybe we're a little bit hard on them. I guess it'll see. Maybe Robert Windsor will turn out to be an all-pro, Pro Bowl type player. We just never know. But overall, yeah, I thought it was a solid draft. I thought that the Colts did a really good job of, this is something I love about Chris Ballard, is when he sees a need, an immediate glaring need, he fills it and turns it into a strength. And I think he did that here, obviously with the 3 technique, getting the player of DeForest Buckner's caliber, and then getting Michael Pittman and Desmond Patmon later on in the draft. I think it just he doubled down on that again, which I think is huge for what the Colts are going to do. And I think it could potentially be a strength next year. So really like this draft quite a lot. And I think that certainly a lot of these guys will have a chance to contribute here week 1 of the 2020 season. It'll be interesting to see which draft picks make the final roster, which guys that are still on the roster kind of get pushed out because of some of these guys, and which other guys will be on the practice squad. And then some guys that inevitably will find home somewhere else. It'll just be interesting to see which guys contribute here in the 2020 season and even beyond. So, all righty, that'll do it for this podcast. Thank you guys so much for all your support and all your love for us. We definitely want to continue to bring out content, even though the draft's over. We want to continue to provide quality content for you. There's some interesting things coming up, especially this Monday with the Malik Hooker, potentially his fifth-year option, potentially being picked up or not. So it'll be interesting. We'll make sure to get that covered for you and give our analysis if and when that does or does not happen. So for Andrew and myself, thanks guys so much, and go Colts.